So now for some general information on how the webinar is going to work. We ask that people stay on mute unless you're the person talking. And as we briefly went over, we're going to share a screen of yellow to give speakers a 15-second warning, and then it will turn to red when the time is up. We are recording the meeting and we'll post it to YouTube, hopefully on Monday. And if speakers could, did that for everyone. Matt's and myself are Green Party volunteers. We do not work for or represent the Green Party, and there have been no staff or candidates involved in organizing or coming up with questions. And we have just organized this ourselves to strengthen the Green Party. We'll have the discussions on a position basis. So it'll be the candidates for Ontario representative will go first, followed by the candidates for the Young Green co-chair. The candidates themselves will give a brief introduction, followed by the Q&A, and then each candidate will have a brief time for a final pitch. So introductions are about 30 seconds long, and then 1.5 minutes for the questions. For the Young Green co-chair position, we have different questions for each candidate that have been chosen randomly. Each candidate is also allowed to answer one other questions that were posed to another candidate, and these are the jokers. And we'll also post the question that's being asked into the chat window. We also would like to acknowledge the importance of the French language, but we do not have the ability to moderate in French, and so we'll be hosting this meeting in English only. And for people who are joining us, I think it's important for everyone to understand what the Young Greens Council does and how the election works. I was never a member of the Young Greens, and so needed to do some research on this for myself. And the Young Greens Council is to ensure the youth voice is heard in Parliament and within the Green Party policies, platforms, and procedures. The Young Greens Council is also to encourage and facilitate involvement of young Canadians in the political process. The co-chairs are also members of the Federal Council. Federal Council is responsible for the strategic decisions of the party and is akin to the governing board for some organizations. There's lots more information at greenparty.ca. To vote, members should have already received a link to the ballot by email. And for each position, you rank the candidates. So it's important to not only decide on who your top pick is, but who your second and third and so on choices are. And on the Green Party website are bios of each of the candidates, as well as job descriptions, which I encourage everyone to check those out as well.
Okay, so I'll take over. The first discussion we're going to have is between the 3 Ontario reps. So everyone's going to have a chance to give a 30-second introduction. I guess it's Maya and Grace. It's just the 2 of you on the call right now. So we'll give each of you a 30-second introduction, and then we'll go through the questions. There'll be 3 questions. You each get 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and you'll have a chance to have some closing remarks at the end. I just see that Victoria is joining us as well. So just give us a second while she is entering the call. Hi, Victoria. Can you hear us? Oh, we just lost Victoria, I think. Oh,
she sent me an email that she was having problems getting in.
Okay. Can you unmute? Oh, there's
Hello.
Victoria.
Yeah, I tried it on my phone because I was having troubles, but then once it came on my computer, I logged off on my phone.
Okay. So we have the 3 of you. I was just explaining that every candidate will get 30 seconds to introduce themselves. We have a quick question that we want you to share with the audience as well. So just share a little bit about yourself so the audience can get to know you, and also just let us know what has changed in your home life in the past few weeks due to coronavirus. So you just have a short amount of time. We're just going to want to get a feel for who you are. We'll get into the actual meat of the discussion in the Q&A. So we'll start with Victoria. If you'd like to jump on first, we'll give you 30 seconds to give a quick introduction.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate you guys hosted this event. Basically, my name is Victoria Galley. I'm running for the Ontario rep position for the Young Greens Federal Council. I'm also the CEO of my local Hamilton West Ancaster riding Dundas. And I also ran as a candidate in the last federal election. And I have just recently become the shadow cabinet critic for the Ministry of Labor for the Green Party of Ontario. And my life has changed because I'm stuck at home, but I've been able to garden more.
Great. And next up is Maya.
Hi everyone, I'm Maya Knight. I'm a first year journalism and political science student at Carleton. In the last election, I ran as one of the youngest candidates in the country in my home riding. I also worked in the call center, like the federal office call center for the Green Party. And in the past few weeks, my life has changed with school mainly because everything has switched to online instead of in-person classes. You know, just trying to keep busy when you can't go out and interact with people. So yeah.
And thank you. And Grace.
Okay, so my name is Grace. I'm a 16-year-old high school student at White Oak Secondary School. I've been volunteering with the Green Party for almost 2 years now. I started on the provincial election on Mike Schreiner's campaign, and most recently in the federal election, I was the youth coordinator and social media person for the Oakville riding, which is a position I still hold in the EDA. And what has changed in my life? Well, I've done a lot more baking in the last few weeks and eaten way more cookies than I should have. So I'm definitely going to gain a few more pounds after this quarantine.
I think you're speaking for a lot of us when it comes to the eating part. The questions, there's 3 questions that we each ask you to answer, and we're just going to cycle the order, so it's a bit different each time. We'll start with Maya this time. We'll give you 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and just keep an eye out for the yellow card at 15 seconds to go. Just finish up any thoughts you have, and please stop when the red card comes up. So Maya, how do you propose to mobilize youth to be more politically active?
Yeah, so I think some really important things to mobilize more youth is just to increase youth representation within the structure, the power structures of the party. I think when you see yourself reflected in the party policy, in the power, or people of power, then you're more empowered to take action. And I think it's really important that we get more young people involved through this council, and also I think in federal council, as well as running as candidates. And I think there are some ways to empower young people to do so. I know in my last campaign, I struggled a bit funding my campaign financially. And I think it would be great if we could set up some supports for young people who are looking to get involved in campaigns, for them to have access to support funding. That would be great. And I just think that having more support structures for young people to be empowered is the best way to increase youth representation.
Great, thank you. And next up, we have Grace. And just a reminder for everybody, we've posted the question in the chat as well, in case you just want to look back at it. So Grace.
Just to double check, I have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay. So mobilizing youth is a large part of my strategy. My main platform is to bring more high school students into politics. I think young energy is something that the Green Party desperately needs in terms of bringing new ideas to the table, as well as bringing more volunteers to help us gain more traction and having more people doing the work and reaching out to voters during election years. So with that being said, how do I propose to mobilize youth to be more politically active? I think two main things. Number one, we really need to show up in front of youth and tell them the ways that they're able to get involved. I think a lot of youth, including my friends and my peers at school, they already care a lot about politics. They know the issues, they know what's happening within our current political climate. They're concerned about their futures just as much as everyone else who is already politically engaged is. The problem is many of them don't have the resources or don't know about the opportunities that are available to them as high school students or even university students. So I think a big part of that is going to universities or going to high schools themselves and getting volunteers that way. It's a lot easier to refuse to like do something or reach out to a political campaign when you only see it on social media. It's much harder to say no or to not want to get politically involved when somebody's standing in front of you and telling you all the reasons why it's so important for you to do so. Secondly, I think we need to run a much more robust social media campaign. I think we need to take notes from people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or people like Michael, the Yang Gang from the United States. They have very robust social media campaigns. That's something that the Green Party also needs to adopt.
Sorry, I was muted. That was the problem. Thank you, Grace. Next, we have Victoria to answer the same question.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to mobilize youth. As a young person that became a CEO during my undergrad and then also ran as a candidate during my master's, I think it's really important. During my campaign, I went to 3 different high schools and elementary schools and really felt the urgency of our climate crisis and their perspective and wanted to know how to get involved. And so with that, I think it's important to make sure our website is accessible to youth, including classroom exercises and actually reaching out to schools to participate with them locally. I think it's very true, the sentiment about being able to reflect what we have as a structure internally and be able to draw those people in and have them want to participate because they see themselves reflected. But it's not just the fact that we need to, create more youth positions in all our structures, but it's also that we need to directly reach out to youth communities and make them feel welcome as well, not just wait around to have them come involved. And then overall, I just think that creating campus clubs, not just in post-secondary, but also in high school is really important. And just having that administrative access there to help get them set up and help support and create things like swag bags and help them with different exercises and campaigns that they can put on themselves at their schools. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Victoria. So the order will be a bit different this time. We'll have Grace up first. And the question, if we accept that the greatest threat to youth today is climate and environmental problems, what is the number 2 problem that youth face today? And how do you propose that this issue should be addressed? And we'll start with Grace.
Okay, so I think number 1, obviously the climate crisis, but number 2, I think the amount of money people need to make a living wage and the opportunities available to young people today, I think is a major barrier. We're seeing people get more and more education, meaning they need more and more qualifications in order to get jobs that would have been accessible if you had a high school degree or simply even a university bachelor's degree 20, 30 years ago. We're seeing that a lot of young people who have these amazing diplomas, who went to these amazing schools and have all the qualifications, are unable to get a job or have to live off of minimum wage because they don't have things like experience or because they don't have things like 30 years or 40 years working for some major company. I think that having job opportunities and being able to make a livable wage is becoming much more harder as well because of how high the cost of living is. We look at places like Toronto, we look at places like Vancouver. The cost of renting a 1-bedroom apartment is extraordinarily out of the reach of many young people, especially when you are making only $15 an hour or $16 an hour, and you're still going to school because you need to get even more qualifications to get those higher paying jobs. I think stuff like that and pushing for things like UBI is going to be really important, especially when we're seeing this massive economic disparity between like the lower middle class and the upper class. I think so being able to support yourselves in a changing economy, in a changing world, especially for young people, is going to be super important.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Victoria.
Thank you. I think the number 2 issue is mental health. I think that we are currently in a crisis with this global pandemic that is worsening everyone's mental health conditions. And I think that before this, we were already worse off than we should be. In other countries, they have things like ministers for loneliness. And I think that this isolation already, due to social isolation and the fear of missing out caused by social media, is now only worse. And now that we are in literal isolation. And I think that our current Green Party policy platform does not target youth directly in this issue. It only throws them in as an add-on and something that can be generalized towards the youth population. And this is why I want to help champion policy reform within the party, which then they can pose to the House floor, because we need to see change that directly targets youth on every different level of the spectrum. So I'm talking about in elementary school, we shouldn't just have, we also need a therapist directly targeted for things like bullying. And then when you get to high school, you shouldn't just have a guidance counselor, but there should also be someone on site there that can help you get through mental health issues. And then also working on preventative mental health care as well. This is something that's not discussed as much as it should be within the party. And I think that we really minimize things like physical health relating to mental health. And this is something I want to make sure that we really focus on in our next election. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And third, we have Maya for the same question.
Yeah, so this is a great question. Thank you for asking. So I think the number 2 issue for young people is accessibility to opportunities in general. So sort of similar to what Grace mentioned, I think increasing access to education to all young people and all communities is the most important thing right now. We see, I'm lucky enough to not have to worry about paying for my education. I'm able to get loans and have my parents help. Not everyone is so lucky. And I think it's really important that we are able to increase access to education, because as we know, knowledge is power, and education is such a powerful tool in increasing access to those opportunities that are so vital to combating issues like Grace mentioned, increasing, involvement and having, being able to make a living wage, so important. And also, like Victoria mentioned, combating mental health, education is so important. And I also think that just the stigma around young people, I think there is a little bit of a stigma when people hear young people are in positions of power. And I think trying to change that and combating that stigma is also so important and can be done through education. So just increasing opportunities for young people is, I think, the number 2 issue for me.
Great, thank you. All very good topics that need to be brought up. Affordability, mental health, and education. And we have one more question for all 3 of you. How would you engage the campus Young Greens and to help them grow as organizations? So specifically the Young Greens clubs on campuses. How would you help them grow? And this time we'll start with Victoria.
I referenced this briefly in targeting mobilizing youth, but I think that as someone who co-founded McMaster Young Greens, I found that we were lacking administrative support. I think that figuring out how to actually set up a campus club is super tricky when you're worrying about exams. And I think that by being able to provide them not just with an initial swag bag of a few buttons and stuff like that, I want to be able to actually support them to have things like posters or t-shirts or something like that. And then that way, when you're able to see someone supporting the Young Greens, you're more interested, and that way they can reach to people that aren't already inclined to the Green Party, but work in the other areas of the campus as well. I also think that providing something like a calendar for different recommended events is really helpful, because another thing that once you're established, then you have to think about all these other events and issues you'd like to put on. And I think having campus-specific petitions like divesting from fossil fuels is a really great initiative that we would be able to help them directly with by formatting that and arranging that for them. Overall, there's lots of different ways to mobilize the youth community on campus, including helping them set up trash cleanups and other food drives and events like that that really help put on a good face for the campus clubs and community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Maya for the same question.
Yeah, so I think that increasing during election years is really important to increase awareness of the candidate in the riding of the university. I think reaching out to those candidates is something really important that we can help with in those election years. Aside from that, I think a main issue I found at Carleton that the campus club was having was just reaching out to different people on campus. So I think increasing the presence of the club in the community can really help to increase membership and just gain awareness for the club. So I think laying out plans as a council to give to the campus clubs to help them to reach out to their communities and reach out to other clubs and just increase awareness within the community is really important. And I think something to do that, so similar to what Victoria mentioned, is to implement national initiatives that we can sort of have like a guideline, and every campus club across Canada can implement the initiative easily, and they can reach out to us for help, and we can sort of facilitate that. And I think that would be a really good addition to help campus clubs increase their awareness and reaching out to young people.
Great, and last we have Grace.
Okay, so I'm going to be real. I'm not in university yet, so clearly I don't have personal experience working on a campus club, but I will say I have talked extensively with university students who are forming their own campus clubs. Just the other day, there was a very lovely York student, and we had a really great conversation on the phone, and she's talking about creating a York campus club for the Green Party, and one of the things that she was having a lot of trouble with was forming connections. She didn't really know where to start, and she didn't really have the resources available to her to know how to get started. So fortunately, I actually, like a lot of the people that worked on the Oakville campaign, they were actually professors at York. I was able to put them in contact. And I also know that I've also talked to a lot of other university students. For instance, Kiera, she started a campus club on Carleton, and I was able to put them into contact, and they were able to share ideas and resources on how to get a campus club started. So I think creating a network for young people across Canada on how to form campus clubs, the resources available to them, what has worked, what has not worked, best practices, as a lot of like managerial people like to call it, and just forming that like larger network of having campus clubs and having young Green Party supporters in different parts of Canada, and sharing those ideas, I think, is probably going to be a really big thing on how we can support them overall.
Great, thank you all for the very insightful answers. So we have some time for some closing remarks. If there's any topic that you thought you wanted to address during the questions and that didn't get brought up, feel free to bring it up here, or any other pitch why you think that you should be chosen or elected to be the Ontario rep. So for the order, we'll start with Maya.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I did run in the last election and worked at the call center at the Green Party head office. So I feel like that really gave me some good experience with being able to connect with voters from across the country and really learn what issues are really important to people who are not necessarily, I guess, committed to one party or the other. So I think that is going to be very helpful to me in helping I form policy. And I also attended a conference in 2015 with the Climate Reality Project, which is Al Gore's foundation, to become educated about how to effectively communicate the climate crisis. And I'm now a certified climate reality leader, which is one of the first steps I took in trying to find how ways to make an impact on helping solve the climate crisis. And I've always really been an advocate for the environment from the time I was 8 years old. And since then, I really have done my best to have an impact. And I felt that this is a really good opportunity for me to be able to try and have an impact in solving the issues that I care about pertaining to climate change and youth issues as well. So.
Great, thank you, Maya. Next up, we have Grace.
Okay, so the Green Party has always been a forward-looking party. The main part of our platform at the end of the day is the climate crisis, and that is something that affects future generations disproportionately more than any other previous generations, obviously. And I think because we are such a forward-looking party, I think it's kind of ridiculous that the average age of our membership is over 50 years old. And the fact that the last slate that we ran in the last election, it was less diverse and had fewer young members than all of the other parties, including the PPC, which I find incredibly embarrassing considering how diversity and future thinking our party is supposed to be. So I think the biggest thing for me is to bring more high school students into the conversation. We are your future voters and we support you en masse. The only reason why we are not getting more high school support is because the Green Party is not doing the things they need to do to actively reach out and engage these high school students. We're passionate, we have a lot of ideas, and we are the ones, in my own experience, having worked on the Oakville campaign, we're the ones who are willing to get up at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning and knock on doors for you for 8 hours. We're the ones who are willing to show up week after week, even when it turns to like -10 degrees in the mornings in an October morning. Like, we're willing to do the work, we're willing to help you get there, but we want to be engaged, and I think part of that engagement means putting more diversity of youth voices, including a high school student, onto the youth council. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Victoria.
Thank you. I briefly mentioned this into my introduction, but I did just become the Green Party of Ontario Shadow Cabinet Critic for the Ministry of Labour. And I think this is something that will be really beneficial as the Ontario representative, that I can then work hand in hand with the GPO and the GPC to truly represent our Ontario Young Greens. I'm also a certified climate action catalyst through the Canadian Service Corps, where I spend 8 months volunteering through Climate Action International, working on ways to mitigate climate change on a local level. I don't know if you've also had a chance to check out, I have a podcast that I've been sharing on all our platforms where I've interviewed all of the leadership candidates that have been declared so far. I'd like to then use this podcast as a platform for our youth members to really voice their opinions about different policy issues and issues across the party as well. I think that with my time with the Green Party since 2017, I did not speak to a single member of our youth council, and I think that's extremely problematic. I want to make sure that our council is extremely accessible, whether it's through social media or through a website, but having regular Zoom calls, etc., reaching out to the youth across the country is really important. And I just want to make sure that we truly do represent the voice of our youth across the country, and there's so many different ways through technology that we are now able to do that. So thank you so much for tuning in today and hearing what we all have to say.
Great, thank you, all three of you. The energy is great and definitely makes me optimistic about the future, having you three run for this position, and to see you more in the Green Party going forward. So with that, that's it for the Ontario rep position. Then I'll hand it over to Teresa to start the discussion for the co-chairs.
Yes, we're gonna switch over to the co-chairs. As we went over beforehand, you will be answering 3 questions. 2 of them have been assigned, and then you can, during the first, until the yellow card goes up in the first bit, you can raise your hand or give a thumbs up. Technically, and then we'll take your names down and you can answer that question. So you end up answering 3 questions total. Okay. Stuart and Sabine are asking the first, or answering, I'm asking the questions. They're answering the first, actually, no. We need to do introductions first. I'll get this straight, okay? 30-second introduction, and yeah, again, tell us how your life has changed in the past 6 weeks or so. And it will be Liana is speaking first, and then B, and I'll put the order in the chat as well.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Liana Canton-Kuzmano. I was born and raised on unceded Mohawk territory, and I currently live in Montreal. I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and a spoken word artist. I've traveled across Canada performing poems under the name By Curious George. And I also ran as a candidate in the last federal election here in the downtown core in Montreal. Since then, I've been involved with my local Greens, with my local EDA. And I think that as a feminized, bisexual, queer, non-binary, trans person, there aren't nearly enough people in politics who look like me. And that's part of the reason I ran. And that's part of the reason I'm running for co-chair. I stay home a lot. That's how my life has changed since the lockdown orders were issued.
Okay, V? Oh. Yeah, oh, he's not here, is he?
No, they're not here.
Yeah, okay, Stuart.
Okay, so my name is Stuart Hunter. I live in Victoria, BC, on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I recently got my honors degree in French from the University of Victoria last fall, and I'm going back to do a master's in the same subject in September. I first joined the Green Party of Canada in 2015, and my initial involvement was with the Vic Greens Campus Club, whose executive I was on for basically the whole time I was in undergrad, and I am currently one of the co-chairs of the Young Greens Council, so I'm hoping that you will re-elect me.
Sabine?
Hi everyone, my name is Sabine and I live on the unceded territory of the Esquimalt First Nations, and I have been so lucky to call a lot of BC and Canada my home. I got involved in 2015 during the federal election when I was 16 years old and have continued to do so on various levels, including serving as the Campaigns and External Affairs Chair during the 2017-2018 Young Greens of Canada Council. Since quarantine started, I have taken on basically, staying at home, but I also work for the BC Green Party, and so I've learned a lot about how to do online organizing over the past, few months.
And now Kiara.
Hi, my name is Kiara Nazon, she, her pronouns. I live in Ottawa on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, but I'm actually currently back home in Toronto. I'm a student at Carleton University, and I actually first got started with the Green Party in my second year at Carleton when I helped co-found my university's campus club, the CU Greens. I'm also the current university representative for the Ottawa Centre, EDA, and CA. Like I said, I've moved back home temporarily from Ottawa to Toronto. I've also, now that I have a bit more time, have been doing some work on a leadership campaign.
Yes, and so thank you. Now we're going to move on to the questions. The first question is for Stuart and Sabine, and people are feel free to answer it as well. So the first question is, what do Young Greens find to be the most underrepresented topic, and which action would you take to bring attention towards this topic? So we're looking for underrepresented. So Stuart.
Well, that's something I wish I had more time to think about. Um, I guess I would have to say, even though this is really not an area I'm an expert in, but it is something that I've definitely noticed young Greens take a lot more seriously than old Greens, and that would be the issue of diversity and inclusion in our party, which is really not something that's prioritized a lot by the people who are currently in charge. Sometimes we pass motions about it and talk about it, but nothing ever really happens. Because action I would take would be to bring it up on federal council, because that's where the decisions need to be made and that's where pressure needs to be applied to make sure that the decisions are actually followed through on, which is even kind of a bigger issue. And I don't think I have anything else to say on that.
Okay. So Sabine, same question.
Yeah, this is, I agree with Stuart. This is a tough question, and I'm really glad that it's being asked. I think as young Greens, we have sort of a perspective on all issues, but from a different lens. And so I'd really like to see just generally the party take on a more youth perspective, even when talking about like various issues that might be, you know, more popular. We never really talk about youth housing when it comes to housing issues and how hard it is to rent as a young person if you have, you know, no one who can co-sign on a renter's agreement because your parents don't have good credit or something like that. You know, that was a struggle that I had when I moved to Ontario. So I think there's, you know, a lot of issues that we may talk about, but we don't actually talk about how it generally affects young people. And I think that we need to make sure that it's not just, okay, these are the youth issues and these are like the adult issues. It's like, okay, how do we have a youth lens for all perspectives and make sure that youth are actually included on all of the decision making, so it's not creating policy that's going to only benefit one person.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I didn't see any hands raised. Unless somebody speaks up, I assume that no one wanted to jump in on this question as well.
Okay. So this question is for Kiara and Liana, and then anyone else, again, is welcome to join in at. What does the Young Greens need from federal council, and how will you engage the relationship with federal council? First up is Kiara.
Hi. Okay. So I think on the question of what youth need from federal council is to be listened to and to actually be engaged with and actually be respected. And I think that's something that is seriously missing within the party. I know I have friends who are on council. The Young Greens have been doing a lot of really, really great work over the past year or so, and the party just keeps getting in the way, whether it's staff, whether it's the council. I think we really need to work with the new executive director, who I'm glad to see has experience on youth engagement. So I'm hopeful that this will sort of be the first step in turning a page. I think a good first step would be starting discussions on if we can get our official national youth coordinator back, so that we actually have somebody on staff working with youth. But I think generally speaking, just the respect and the acknowledgement that we do have skills to bring to the table. Sometimes we might need a little bit of training, and that training should be provided so that we can actually get engaged and actually contribute to the party, because I think when we do, the party will only benefit from that. So that's what I would say.
I think that what the youth of the Green Party need from the federal council is just to be taken seriously. When you really boil it down to what do we need from federal council, is we need them to understand how much of an impact Young Greens can have. And I think that in addition to insisting on things like a national youth coordinator, or insisting that we be heard or paid attention to, or that our demands be our demands, that our requests, that our suggestions be met and taken into account, I think that forming very, very close interpersonal relationships with all of the individuals on federal council is also something that we can bring to the table. I think that all of the provincial and territorial reps, all of the VPs, anybody who has a seat on council, they're all individuals, and everybody has their heart in the right place, and that's why we're all here. And so I think that liaising with members of the federal council as individuals, and getting to know, all of us getting to know one another, I think it then becomes a lot easier to be convincing when you know someone on a more personal level. We're all here for the same reasons. And so as youth, here's what we need, here's what we want, here's what we would like from you, and please take us seriously.
Yeah, we see Stuart and Sabine want to answer this. Stuart, you can go.
Okay, so I can speak to this from personal experience. I'm going to completely concur with what Kira and Liana said. I especially like what Kira said about the Young Greens Council doing a lot of good work over the past little while, which is definitely true. And then what Liana said about being taken seriously is actually a very important thing, and that is how I would have answered this question. The importance of personal relationships is also very important, which is a silly way to phrase that, but you know what I mean. I have already been building personal relationships with the people who, well, the 6 people who are definitely staying on federal council over the past couple of years, and I think that is that's an advantage that I have. Just to give an example of why we need to be taken more seriously is I was listening to the answers to questions from the Ontario rep candidates, and they made me kind of sad actually, because a lot of what you guys are proposing, especially on the campus club question, is actually stuff that we tried to do, like having a calendar of events for campus clubs to follow and having sort of ways to help them get set up. And we worked on these things for weeks and weeks last summer, and then when we brought it forward to federal council or to staff, it all got shot down, like it wasn't in the right format. But that's because the council is not supported like during the whole process. And so what we need is for federal council and also staff to involve us in decisions and processes the whole time, not just once we've come up with something to propose.
Now to Sabine.
Yeah, I think this is actually why I decided to run for co-chair this time around. I was part of the bylaw overhaul in 2017 and 2018. That was pretty much the majority of my time on council, was working through those bylaws, working with the National Youth Coordinator at that time and the rest of staff to ensure that we would have a National Youth Coordinator and that we would actually implement the National Youth Strategy, which the party spent like a lot of money on and then completely ignored. And so I think what really needs to happen is we need a strong person in a co-chair position who's actually going to go up to federal council and say, hey, we're supposed to have a budget. You need to give us overhaul of our budget. The person who took over our treasurer position when that on council at that time wasn't allowed to see any of our budget. We had no overhaul, we had no ability to actually operate within our jurisdiction, and they've completely stripped a lot of that power. And I gotta commend the previous council for everything that they've done and how hard they've worked to try and push these things forward. But we need someone who's actually going to set up for federal council ensure and say, we need our budget. You need to ensure that the executive director is appointing a national youth coordinator and not firing them or shuffling things around in an election year when we should be focusing on youth, and we should actually have a huge focal point being youth during an election year, because that's how we actually get elected. We need to capitalize on the youth movement, and I think the policy hasn't been there. I think the support hasn't been there, and we need a huge overhaul of this system. So thanks.
For question 3, it will be Sabine and Kiara. And it is, what would you like campus clubs to achieve, and how will you engage with them? Yeah. So, okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. I think that campus clubs are a huge gateway into how we actually mobilize with young people across the country. I sat on the University of Ottawa campus club, and one of the struggles that we had was, you know, finding members to actually do stuff that weren't preoccupied with, like, you know, working and doing school. And so I think how we actually support them is first actually having a budget to give them the things that they need, making sure that we have a national youth coordinator who takes on these projects, because the purpose of council is to set this strategic direction for that youth coordinator, and they're actually supposed to implement it. And we haven't seen that done, and we haven't seen campus clubs actually being supported over the past 2 years. And it breaks my heart, because there's so much opportunity there. So I think we need to make sure that those things are in place, and that we're having, you know, active you know, conversations with them. We're having meetings with the people who run those campus clubs and council, so we can hear their feedback. We need to make sure that Young Greens of Canada is engaging with its membership, and that's one of the key ways we engage with our membership is through campus clubs. So I want them to achieve, you know, so much. I think they're kind of, I look at them as EDAs and how we work as an organization. They are our local organizers, so we need them to make sure that we can actually achieve anything in this party.
So thank you for that question. I'd like to highlight 2 of the things that Sabine said that I definitely agree with. I think that the youth coordinator is a huge first step that we really need to undertake. And I know that it is sort of a big ask, and it's not something that we can, you know, maybe get right away, but I think that it should be a big priority. I also think that improved communication between the council and the campus clubs is really important, especially right now while we don't have a national youth coordinator. We're kind of like, we're it for the campus clubs, as realistically as far as it goes. I think one thing I would like to see from campus clubs is the support and the resources so that they can expand and really do the work that I know that they're capable of. I helped start a campus club, and to be perfectly honest, I wish that the CU Greens could do so much more than they could, but to do that, they need resources and they need more support. And they need more support than just the council can give. So again, this comes down to making sure that the party is really buying into the work that the council is doing, because I do think that, you know, within the party, as far as official standing goes, they are essentially treated like EDAs. And I think that they should be able to do a lot of the outreach work that EDAs are able to do to a certain extent. Universities are very well integrated into their communities. And so it gives university campus clubs a really great opportunity to reach out into the further community. There's a lot of connections with local high schools, for example. So I think getting university students from campus clubs in front of high schoolers is one thing that we could do, but doing more outreach outside of the school. But that all starts with more support.
Oh, Teresa, you're on mute. And if I could also jump in just for a second. Leanna, I think if I'm right, you've answered 1 question so far.
Yes, that's right.
And because you're answering the first question or the next question as well, maybe you want to jump in on this one just so you get your 3 questions
Yes.
as well.
I think that, like Kiara said, campus clubs within the university are very potentially isolated and insulated groups. But that being said, so many university campus clubs do have connections into to the larger community. And I think that capitalizing on that as a youth council that has the opportunity to support these campus clubs will go a long way in between elections and during elections. So I think that outreach is something that campus clubs should be able to achieve, and also dramatically increasing their membership. And dramatically increasing their membership comes from convincing people to join and giving them reasons why this should take up a significant portion of your time as a student when you have so many other things to do. And that goes not just from convincing them on an ideological perspective, but also on a practical perspective, which is, here's who we are, here's what we do, it's fun and it matters, and here's why you should join. And that comes from organization and resources and outreach and support at a party level on the youth council and on the federal council.
Okay, thank you. Now, the fourth question is for Liana and Stuart. And it is, what are good ways to keep people engaged in politics after post-secondary education? And so Liana, you get to go first.
I think that immediately after post-secondary education, people are very, very involved with trying to put their degrees or their education to good use and trying to get a foothold in the housing market or in the workforce. And those are the issues that are important to them. And so addressing people within that demographic on those specific issues is a way to get them interested and involved in politics, and indicating to them that this kind of, not just indicating to them because they already know, but showing that we understand that these issues are important year round all the time, and not just during an election campaign or during an election year. So I think that having really, really tight connections with EDAs, with volunteers within those EDAs, with members within the communities that surround those EDAs. There are so many people at so many different levels who occupy specific roles, both in the party and outside of the party, that can be connected with, and whose skills and offerings we can definitely use to grow us as a movement and as a party, but also to bring all of us closer together.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart, you can answer the question now.
Okay, I mean, I've got a pretty similar answer. I thought of the same things, basically. Well, the first thing I thought was, in the question that says, how do we keep people engaged after post-secondary education? There's an assumption there that they were engaged during their post-secondary education. So one way to keep them engaged is if they had a nice time being engaged during their post-secondary education. So if we have done all that campus club stuff properly, then that will make this easier. And then focusing on policy that kind of group of people are interested in, the kind that their lives are centered around during that time, is also important. And then I was going to mention strong EDAs, because these people will be leaving their campus clubs and then they might be moving back to where they came from, or they might be moving somewhere else. And if there's a strong EDA in the region that they're going back to, or in the region where they're just not actively involved in the campus club anymore, then it will be easier for them to stay engaged if there's things for them to do in their local community. And that's the end of my answer.
Okay, we have a fifth question, and I think we'll have all
Teresa,
four.
Just want to interrupt. Kiara put up her hand to answer this
Oh,
question as well.
Sorry.
Once again, yeah, okay, so the question does, like Stuart said, presuppose that they were involved in post-secondary during their post-secondary years, but I would say the first step is obviously getting them engaged, not only from post-secondary, but from high school years, because that continuity will be sort of a big factor. I think one big thing that we can do is provide them with opportunities for skills development. I think, like Liana said, a lot of young people are looking for, how are they going to start their life? How are they going to get that first big job, getting into, you know, paying for housing for the first time, potentially in, in bigger ways. So they're really sort of starting their life in a bigger way. So providing them with opportunities to have skills that they can use outside of the party, but also within the party, I think is a big thing. But I think the biggest thing is making sure that we have a welcoming and inclusive atmosphere. I think that increasing diversity, increasing inclusion within the party really starts from the internal structures, and making sure that our governance is putting forward measures to make sure that everybody feels welcome and comfortable within the party, so that they're not being pushed away at any point, whether that is during their post-secondary years or outside of it.
Okay, thank you for that. As I was saying earlier, we have a fifth question, so all four of you can answer the fifth question. And Sabine is up first, and it's, tell us a time that you had a conflict with someone and how did you resolve it?
Sorry, the lovely thing of cohabitation as you live in a small place. One of the examples is kind of on a daily basis. I live with my boyfriend, and we've been together 2 years, and I love them very dearly. But also things can get frustrating, and having almost been living in the house for 2 months where we don't really get a lot of time separate from each other, it can breed conflict. And I think in any type of conflict that exists, if it's a workplace, if it's on a personal level, how I like to manage it is by openly communicating what the frustration is, what the conflict might be, and then working with them to make sure that we, what is our path forward, what is the desirable goal, and how do we, either make compromises or make a consensus on how do we actually improve this system. I talked a lot about how these things need to change in federal council and the party structure, and I want to be that strong voice that actually brings those things up with federal council, but I don't want to come at it in the way that's like accusing people. I want to make sure that any voice that I bring to federal council and to Young Greens Council is a collaborative one where we have all of the same goals in mind. We need youth engagement. Everyone recognizes it. So how do we actually have a collaborative discussion and ensure that everyone is on the same page and everyone feels included? And I think that's how we make sure any conflicts that arise happens. It happens on a daily basis. Conflict is a natural part of living and working with people, and so we need to actually remember that we're all still people and we all have the same goal in mind. Thanks.
I think Kiara, you're up next.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize that I was up next. So during the October 2019 campaign, I was working as a GOTV coordinator, so Get Out the Vote coordinator for the campaign in Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke. And one conflict that came up was I had made the decision not to undertake a particular action because I believed that we didn't have enough volunteers to take that action, and we would have had to pull them away from something more important. And somebody else who was fairly important on the campaign disagreed and thought that we should have been undertaking that action. And I think a lot of times when there is conflict like that or a misunderstanding, I think the first thing that I do is I make sure to check in with myself and ask, what can I do? Am I standing in the way of resolving this conflict somehow? Because sometimes when you have a disagreement with somebody, it's very easy to get defensive. It's very easy to get up in arms and not realize the things that you are doing to not improve that situation. And then I think after that, it's to, once you sort of acknowledge that, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is how I can potentially get out of the way of this conflict. The next step that I took was just talking to them and saying, okay, why do you feel that we need to take this action? Why do you feel that it's so important? And finding out sort of what was at the heart of the conflict, and then finding a compromise that we could both agree on. And I think that is a way of sort of resolving conflicts that allows relationships to be preserved, but also solves the problems and allows us to move forward.
During the 2019 election campaign, a journalist refused to use my pronouns in an official publication, and which was obviously, very distressing. And I was very, very tempted to go in guns blazing and, insisting that this is a violation of my human rights under Law C-16, which has been in effect for 2 years, and here's why you're wrong. And I think that it's very, very easy to become very emotionally wrapped up in things that are important to us. And in a conflict where the stakes, independently of how high or low the stakes are, people will hold fast to what they believe, and nobody ever thinks that they're the bad guy. And so approaching a disagreement very diplomatically while taking the other person's perspective into account. And it doesn't matter if they're making you angry, and it actually doesn't matter if they're wrong, because they don't think so. And it's only when you sit down and talk to them and explain with bullet points, if you have to, that maybe you'll get somewhere. And if you don't, you have to just leave it. And you have to make sure that you don't leave it as scorched earth, that you leave it just as, okay, I've expended this amount of emotional energy on this individual, and I've helped them to understand a couple of things, but my understanding of this conflict and my feelings on it are actually part of my privilege, and not everybody has that opportunity or that understanding of issues at that level. So sometimes you have to agree to disagree, and you have to leave it. And there's a way to do that without leaving everything on fire, or without having somebody hold a lot of resentment towards you.
Stuart.
Okay, as always with all the other questions, everyone's answers before mine have been excellent. In terms of Green Party stuff, I really actively try to avoid conflict as much as possible. I am very careful in how I approach communicating with various people and entities in the party, and I think I'm obviously I can't be the one to say this, but I'm pretty sure I am one of the most trusted people on federal council by other members of federal council, because I've had members of federal council who often are in conflict with each other, independently say to me that they really appreciate my, work ethic and everything like that. So it is, as Leanna said, it's very important to be diplomatic and not to think that anyone is a bad guy, because, and this is something that I've been sort of disturbed by, honestly, in the federal council election that's going on right now, not in the Young Greens one at all, but in the federal council one, people are claiming to be the true representatives of green values and stuff like that, when we're all here for the same reason, and we all support green values, and we're all on the same side. And it is quite distressing to me when there's needless conflict between members. I don't have time to explain this, but consensus-based decision-making is a very important thing, and it's a big reason why I support the Green Party, and following that process is a good thing to do, and it helps you solve conflicts.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll, a minute and a half to do sort of a closing pitch, talk on any issues that you feel that you didn't get it to a chance to earlier. And I'm gonna, Stuart, you can go first with your closing pitch.
Okay, I guess I'll use the time in my closing pitch to explain why I'm running. The first time I decided to run in 2018, it was because I was pretty sure that I had the right skill set to take on the position of co-chair. I quite specifically decided to run for co-chair and not for BC rep, because I thought I would be good at it, obviously. That has since been confirmed by a bunch of, everyone who's currently on the Young Greens Council has said that, that was correct. And then The reason I'm running this time is primarily because I don't want all my experience to go to waste. I have spent a long time, well, what seems like a really long time, but actually is like a year and a half, figuring out how to do this job properly. And I don't want the up to 6 new members of the Young Greens Council and the up to 12 new members of Federal Council to have to be starting from scratch. And I really want to be there to support whoever the other co-chair is in getting settled in and getting going and understanding the role and everything. And I will conclude by saying, please get in touch with me if you want to talk about anything, because I am much better at one-on-one communications. So you can find me on Facebook or on the GPC Slack, or you can email me at stuart.hunter@greenparty.ca. Thanks.
Sabine?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank my fellow co-chair candidates as well as everyone on the call for Young Greens of Canada Ontario rep for just putting your name forward. I think the fact that we have so many people running for co-chair really symbolizes how important this is and how important Young Greens Canada is going to be in the future and right now. So kudos to you guys for actually stepping forward. It's not always easy to put your name forward. I got involved in 2015 because I thought that it was the right thing to do. I was a high school student. I needed something fun to do after school. And then I realized that this is actually what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to dedicate myself to, you know, bettering Canada, bettering my community, and working with, you know, young people and people from across the country on the issues that matter. And so that's why I've decided to put my name forward, because I have seen a lack in leadership in this party, and we are going through such a time of change with our leadership contest. We have a new executive director, federal councils having a whole slate. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a strong voice on council that is going to help lead that leadership. We need to make sure that we're having someone who is able to take on those hard conversations and not stray away from, you know, conflict. Conflict is a necessary thing in some relations. It's how you handle that. And so that's why I've put my name forward. I'm really looking forward to seeing whoever gets elected take on a huge opportunity. And, you know, my closing thoughts are that, you know, I hope you'll vote for me. I'm really excited to get going and, you know, keep working hard for everyone. Thank you.
Kiara, you're up.
Perfect. All right. Well, I just want to start by thanking the Waterloo Regional Greens for organizing this. Really appreciated having another opportunity to sort of speak on the issues and answer some questions. So I really appreciate you guys organizing this. And I think that the major reasons that I'm running for Young Greens co-chair is that I think that there are 2 major issues facing the party right now that need to be addressed. And I think that I have the experience to deal with them. I think that these big factors are a lack of diversity within the party and the failure of the party to sort of effectively mobilize and capitalize youth that really want to get involved and just aren't given the opportunities. I have worked in youth advocacy for a while. I've been part of UNICEF Carleton, working on youth advocacy initiatives on my university campus as a president for the past year and a half, and then previously worked with them. I've worked with campus activist organizations as well, like Climate Action Carleton. I'm currently taking a key part in our divestment campaign that we're just getting started. But I think that really Young Greens are the future of the party, and we're kind of being left behind by the party right now. And I think a really big thing is just making sure that you know, we have the structures and the resources for Young Greens moving forward to really bring the party forward in what it needs to do, but also making sure that we have better internal structures to make sure that people of color and other marginalized people actually feel welcomed and championed within the party. And 2 summers ago, I had the opportunity to work with at a center for people with disabilities. And that's where I learned that the best place to make these changes a reality, is by working within internal structures. So that's why I want to run for the co-chair position. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Okay. And yeah, Liana.
The Green Party of Canada had the least diverse slate of candidates in the last election across the board. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that not enough people know that on average, you have to ask a woman or a feminized person or a person of color 6 times to run before they'll run for federal office, compared to someone who's male or masculinized or white. Usually you have to ask them, once or twice. And I think that there have been efforts in the past on the party has made efforts to do this outreach and to reach out and to seek this diversity. But the last bit that's missing just isn't there. And I think that a responsible and diplomatic and knowledgeable co-chair will understand that you need to go and find the people who need us and who need representation, and ask them what their needs are, and ask them how we can help them advance their goals or help them affect change in their communities. A lot of us have been conditioned to take up less space, to not speak as loudly as other people. And I think that with an accessible form of governance, with individuals who look like the membership, who look like the volunteers, who look like the youth across Canada, I think that once we have those in place, it'll be a lot easier to reach out to Young Greens, to connect with them, to affect change within the party and outside of the party. So I am active on the spoken word circuit across Canada, and the spoken word circuit is populated by people who exist at the intersection of lots of different marginalizations. And these people feel, a number of them and a number of us feel totally abandoned and poorly represented, if represented at all, by the people in positions of power. And I think that people with this kind of disillusionment need to be welcomed and need to be taken into consideration. And this is in communities across Canada. And I think that people of color, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, people who exist in the LGBTQ plus community, all of these people are people with unique needs, and they are the ones who are going to tell us how we can meet them. And so I think that effective and compassionate and diplomatic communication is how we're going to make change within the party.
Well, thanks for all those opinions and thoughts on the issue. You guys, the whole group of you there's so much passion and energy there. I'm just sort of excited to see what direction the party gets pulled with you guys. Even if you're not elected, you're still going to be involved, and you're still going to be pulling that party into a new direction. And I find that incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I can, on all the answers that you guys gave, I learned a lot of new things just listening to you guys. So that's great in itself. There's some answers to questions where you guys had differing opinions, and that's great to have different perspectives coming in. But I think overall, you guys all have the same values, the values that the Green Party shares. That things like democracy and diversity are very important, and that's how we need to build a strong party.